I'm old enough to remember a lot of Christmases with a lot of wonderful memories, but this story goes back just 3 years. When the kids were small, we had a tradition that went back at least to my childhood, and it was probably very much like a tradition that many of you had. On Christmas Eve, all of the gifts would go under the tree, and Santa Claus, of course, would arrive after we were all asleep to add his own to the stacks. On Christmas morning, we all opened our gifts together, generally without even taking time for anything to eat, although I always tried to grab a cup of coffee at least. The ceremony always began with the kids dumping the contents of their stockings to see what Santa had left them. Then one of us would station himself or herself under the tree, read the tags on the packages, distribute them to the intended recipients. And packages would be opened in a fraction of the time it had taken to wrap them. But even while opening our own gifts, we always tried to observe what other people were opening, especially if it was a gift that we had given. Only when everything was open would we take time for breakfast, which usually consisted mainly of a traditional coffee cake with slivered almonds on top. But later in the day, we would travel to Yvonne's parents' house, where we all enjoyed Christmas dinner and conversation. In recent years, her parents have come to our house for dinner. Well, in May of 2005, our son Jack was married, and our daughter Lisa was married the following October. So by Christmas 2007, they had been on their own for over 2 years, and only Laura remained in the nest. But the older kids quickly established that they wanted to maintain the tradition. So each Christmas morning, they arrived with their spouses at our house for the traditional opening of the gifts. And of course, with their mates in the mix, there were even more things to open, and it took even longer to do it. On this particular Christmas morning, I think Jack and Carrie arrived first, followed shortly by Lisa and Bob, each of them bringing more gaudy packages. And we distributed the gifts, started to open them. This went on for some time until the floor was littered with paper and bows and ribbons. When we realized that everything was open, Lisa looked around and said, "Is that all?" There was supposed to be one more package for Mom and Dad. And she handled it really well, with a perfectly straight face. "Maybe I left it in the car." So she went out to look for it. And sure enough, she returned with a package in her hand. It was a small, rectangular package, not very impressive looking. "You have to open it together," she instructed us. And so Yvonne and I struggled, each pulling on one end of this package, which soon proved to be a picture frame. But the picture in it didn't look like anything I recognized. My only thought was that it vaguely resembled something mechanical. But as I continued to stare at it uncomprehendingly, I realized that Yvonne was crying and that they were tears of joy. And then it dawned on me what I was looking at. It was an ultrasound image of a tiny human being, one that was far from fully formed, but a human being all the same. We were going to be grandparents. Later, I told Lisa that I was reminded of some lines from Psalm 139, which is possibly my favorite psalm. And it's one that describes the inability of our escaping from God's loving care. Addressing God, the psalmist says, "For thou didst form my inward parts. Thou didst knit me together in my mother's womb. Thy eyes beheld my unformed substance. In thy book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." And now that I understood what the image was, it was as if I was looking at God's work in progress. The following July, our granddaughter Lucy entered the world, to be followed by her sister Fiona 2 years later. And our lives have not been the same, but our Christmases have been more blessed than ever. Oh, and this is the image.